Hey guys, Roman here from Tech Guides, and in this video I'm going to show you the best upscaling/sharpening filter to use in Modern Warfare 2. Now for this I'll go through the performance impact of each and every sharpening filter in MW2, and I'll also show you side-by-side comparisons of the different upscaling techniques, such that you can decide yourself which sharpening filter you like the most. Now, in order to get a good estimate of the performance impact of the different sharpening filters, I benchmarked each and every sharpening filter on two systems. My primary system, which has an i9-12900K clocked at 5 GHz and which is paired with a RTX 3070, as well as on my secondary system, which runs on an i7-7700K and the GTX 1060. And with having said that, let's jump into our first performance results when using the FidelityFX CAS sharpening filter in Modern Warfare 2. Now on this graph you can see my primary system in blue and my secondary system in orange, with the average performance in dark and the 1% lows in the bright colors. Now, besides simply showing the absolute performance in FPS, I'm also showing the relative change to enabling a certain sharpening filter in percent. In essence, you can see that enabling FidelityFX CAS reduces performance by 2 to 3%. On screen, you can now see a comparison between running the game natively in 1440p and enabling FidelityFX CAS. As you can see, the game looks much sharper when enabling this option, and interestingly, all the textures also look like they are now rendered in a higher resolution than what they actually are. Also note how in the comparison of the built-in benchmark, you can see that the sample with FidelityFX CAS enabled looks like it has more clarity to it, maybe some sort of post-processing that was maybe disabled for it, I'm not entirely sure, and then also how all of the textures look like they are higher resolved. Now, I personally really enjoy enabling FidelityFX CAS. I think it makes the game look much more enjoyable than when not having enabled this option. Obviously, these improvements in visual fidelity do also come with a slight performance penalty, whereas the other filters discussed in this video are actually upscaling filters. That is, they render the game in a lower resolution and then upscale to your native resolution, and are therefore beneficial if you're looking to improve performance. Now, besides simply enabling FidelityFX CAS, there is also the option to modify the intensity of the effect. And essentially, performance-wise, you'll always get exactly the same penalty, regardless of the strength chosen. When looking at a quick comparison again, once again, this is native 1440p, you can see that even enabling CAS at 0% intensity already has a beneficial effect on the game. Going up even higher to 50% makes everything much sharper and crispier. And finally, 100% definitely goes slightly overboard. Everything looks a bit grainy and completely over-sharpened. So therefore, I personally would recommend, if you want to enable FidelityFX CAS, stick to a strength of 50%. Alright, now let's continue with the first upscaling technique, which is AMD FSR. Now, on both of my systems, I'm getting a significant increase in performance when enabling this option, and especially on my secondary system, where I'm running only a 1080p display, using these upscaling techniques actually has quite the benefit in terms of improving gaming performance. But of course, all of these performance improvements also come with a significant deterioration of the visual fidelity or visual clarity of the game. So now let's also go through a visual comparison of these different presets. As always, we're starting with native 1440p, and I'm now going to switch to the highest performing or least good looking preset, which is FSR Performance. In this preset, the game is actually only run at a resolution of 50%, and it really shows because all of the textures are extremely muddy and fine details become a pixelated mess. FSR Balanced is now running the game at 58% and still gives you a huge performance boost, but again, I would not recommend to run this preset due to the highly pixelated nature of the image. FSR Quality is probably the first preset that I could potentially see some people using if they really have unplayable performance and just want to play the game regardless of how it looks. However, personally, I would prefer to use the FSR Ultra Quality preset if I had to use it, because it still retains the most detail in-game while providing a healthy 20 to 25% performance boost. Moving on to Nvidia image scaling, which is essentially very comparable to AMD FSR, as it also has the performance, balanced, quality, and ultra quality presets. And the first three of those are actually run at the same native resolution, so that's the 55, 58, and 66% of your regular resolution, and therefore the performance numbers are very comparable to AMD FSR. So I guess here it's going to be interesting to compare Nvidia image scaling to AMD FSR and see which is the better option, as the performance gains are very comparable. Again, the performance preset is pretty much unplayable with highly granular textures, and it's actually even worse with Nvidia image scaling when compared to FSR performance, which is slightly smoother. The same holds true for the balanced preset, which is completely over-sharpened, even at a sharpness intensity of only 30%. And again, the equivalent balanced preset of AMD FSR looks slightly smoother and slightly better. At the quality preset, these two different filters now start to converge quite significantly, so they essentially look basically the same if you look at kind of the cables across the sky, the palm shadows at the floor, or even the edges of the buildings. All of these features look very comparable both on Nvidia image scaling and AMD FSR quality. And if we also consider the performance numbers that I'm getting, then from my experience, I found that on the higher resolution monitor, I got more performance benefit from using Nvidia image scaling, whereas on the lower end system that only has a 1080p display, I got a higher performance boost with AMD FSR. Finally, on the ultra quality preset, the render resolution with Nvidia image scaling is actually lower at 66% compared to AMD FSR, while the visual clarity is pretty comparable. But quite surprisingly, once again, I'm getting high performance using AMD FSR ultra quality on my lower end system when compared to the ultra quality preset of Nvidia image scaling. And vice versa, on my primary system, which is here shown in blue, I'm getting the higher performance using Nvidia image scaling ultra quality. Finally, Nvidia image scaling also has the option to run at the native resolution, so in my case at 1440p, and therefore we're going to compare it here first to actual native 1440p, and later also to Fidelity CAS, which also runs the game at the native resolution and also has a very comparable drop in performance as Nvidia image scaling when enabled. Now clearly, when going from native 1440p to Nvidia image scaling at native resolution, then we can see that the entire image becomes much sharper and crispier, and maybe even a bit over-sharpened. And frankly, when compared to FidelityFX CAS, I'm not really able to tell much of a difference, even when going back and forth all the time. The only actual difference that I can tell is that Nvidia image scaling seems to be a bit over-sharpened, that is, that you get more jaggy edges. However, Nvidia image scaling also has an additional option to modify the sharpness that is added to the game, and therefore you could probably get Nvidia image scaling to look exactly the same as FidelityFX CAS. So I guess in the end, it really comes down to which of these two filters performs better on your specific system. However, if my benchmark is anything to go by, then they'll probably perform exactly the same. Finally, as I've just mentioned, it's also possible to modify the sharpness that is added to the Nvidia image scaler. Very briefly, here's a comparison of the different sharpness levels. And personally, I would not go beyond 30% or 0.3 sharpness. Actually, probably even stick it a bit lower, maybe 0.2, because anything beyond that really makes the game completely over-sharpened. You'll introduce fringing around cables and very strong aliasing along canted surfaces. Alright, and with that, let's talk about DLSS, or Deep Learning Supersampling. Now, of course, for the benchmark, I only have results for the system that actually has an Nvidia GPU that supports DLSS, so those are the 20 or 30 series GPUs. Also, doing side-by-side comparisons of a still image doesn't really make an awful lot of sense with DLSS, because DLSS usually does a pretty good job at kind of upscaling still images, but where you really see sort of how DLSS performs is when you look at a scene with movement. So here's how DLSS Ultra Performance looks, which actually gives me a performance boost of almost 50%. Now note how you can clearly tell that the game is rendered at a much lower resolution, and this overall makes the game look almost cartoonish, I would describe it as. And of course all of the textures look like they are much lower resolved than what they should be. So unless you're absolutely struggling for performance, I would stay away from DLSS Ultra Performance. Better visual clarity you'll get with DLSS Performance, which still improves performance by 34% on my system, but still I think the sort of cartoonish look is still very much visible. DLSS Balanced would probably be the first preset that I would consider to be usable in fact. It increases performance by 25% and looks sort of acceptable. Textures are still quite mushy and there still seems to be a lot of fringing going on around objects. Finally, DLSS Quality improves performance by about 16% on my system, and this is likely the preset that I were to use if I wanted to use DLSS. However, in this last comparison shot here, I still want to compare DLSS to Fidelity CAS and just kind of show you how bad DLSS actually looks compared to Fidelity CAS. In this comparison here, you can see how the grass in the background becomes a complete mess in DLSS, and also the palm trees in the far distance also barely retain any texture with DLSS. Similar as for Nvidia image scaling, you can select the sharpness level of DLSS that you want, and here the numbers are a bit different. It's between 50 and 100%, and in fact you probably don't want to go beyond 80%, as after that once again you'll introduce strong fringing and aliasing, so probably around 75% would be the sweet spot. The final filter that is available in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is Intel XESS. Now whenever I selected any one of those filters and went back into the settings, then the filter has reset for some reason. So no matter what I do and no matter the system, I don't seem to be able to enable this type of filter. However, when I then just run a benchmark after enabling it, or presumably enabling it, then you can see that with each of these presets, I'm dropping significant performance, especially on my primary system. And when I'm looking at a visual comparison, then I can see that there seems to be some sharpening going on when going from native to either of these presets. However, then there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between these different presets, and because the performance penalty is that severe, I would definitely keep your hands off Intel XESS for the moment. Alright, and that sums it up when it comes to the different sharpening and upscaling filters in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Now once again, if you enjoy this type of content, then definitely smash that like button and comment down below for the algorithm, and subscribe for more in-depth videos like the one you're currently watching. But that's it for today guys, thank you so much for watching, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys in the next video.